Hello, wargaming community. I know it's been a little while since I've posted any content on this channel, and I'd like to apologize for that. And then I'd like to follow up with an explanation as to where I've been. Unfortunately, 2023 has been one of those years that has turned my life upside down a little bit, so to speak. And I've been dealing with those things where gaming and that type of thing, socialization, has really taken a back seat to trying to deal with the things going on in my life. And not to get into too much depth into it here, but we'll just say my engagement was ended a few months ago. I've lost track of time. Shortly after that, I was laid off, and now I'm dealing with an Achilles injury that may require surgery. So it's been the trifecta of suck. So I haven't been around gaming really for a while. I've been trying to recover from all that. So if you're interested in following those exploits, I do have a YouTube channel I created to kind of blog the healing process and go over some kind of issues that I see men going through in today's society. You can look in the description below for that if you want to check out those videos. I've been pretty active on there. But I wanted to get back to some gaming. And today I want to go over, it's a topic that I probably have covered in the past, but I think it's important. And that's really the concept of balance, which means most people can't or don't understand balance, or they think they understand balance, but you can't balance things for everybody. You know, how important is game balance to our community? Because you see it all the time, right? Everywhere I go, I see it. So I'm going to put my game designer hat on, and I'm just going to go over what I've seen in the, from having to create games, and also from being on the other end from playing games. So the first thing I'd like to just point out, the big daddy of all war games is Games Workshop. And they're also probably the worst balanced of the lot, easily the worst balanced of the lot. And they've been the worst balanced of the lot for over a decade, maybe you could argue over a couple decades. And that's an intentional business decision, because they're basically a subscription as a service. It's just that instead of paying a subscription fee, you go to the store every 6 months and you buy the newest models or whatever to keep up, so that your friends aren't pile driving you through the table. And the drip feeding of the codexes or the army lists or whatever encourages that as well, because what's good today often is not good 6 months from now. And they know that a lot of us play games because we like that, I don't know if you want to use the word competitive, but at least, when I sit down to play Monopoly or poker or whatever, I like to know that it's pretty even. And, I wouldn't play a game of Monopoly if you got to get $1,000 every time you hit go and you moved, you rolled the dice twice to move because you chose the car model. Like, I don't know that anyone would want to play that game, but that is exactly how I see like Warhammer and 40K and how those games have always been. And we've accepted that, and we contribute to that by shoveling truckloads of money their way every time they drop something. We know that the new version of 40K dropped, and I've just been watching from afar, and we've already started to see the cracks show up. There's a local narrative campaign where I am, where the narrative organizer, he came out of the gate all excited. This is going to be the most balanced edition of 40K ever. He's just, basically repeating the media, what was been posted. And I don't know, maybe about a month or two after that, he's already got house rules to curb some of the broken things, because there's already things broken. And like, if you've been doing this for any great length of time, like, none of that shocks you. Like, oh, well, it's broken. There's things that are broken that you have to watch for. Yep. So I honestly think that balance by itself is I don't really think the community really wants balance, to be honest. I have had that opinion for a long time. I think I came to that. I came to that ultimate conclusion when I did the Azir points for Age of Sigmar back before they had points. Just listening to the feedback coming in, and it's just basically been solidified after that. Like, true balance is not something that people want. People would consider true balance to be boring. If I can rock up to the table with 2,000 points and you can rock up to the table with 2,000 points, and there's an equal chance that, the army list at least doesn't play a role, it's how we play the game, people will be bored and not spend money on that. So we know that that's true. We know that people like to break the game. They like, really, a lot of the hobby. There's a lot of crossover from like card games, and it's a lot of the game itself is building the list and then winding it up and watching it and sitting back and watching it play out, not actually playing the game. So there's that separation between wargaming, which is what I would call wargaming, coming up in the late 80s and 90s, where I started wargaming with BattleTech in like 1988. And then in the Army, when I served in the Army, in the sandbox, we had rules. Whereas actual wargaming was, you had to overcome things on the table. Whereas today it's more, you have to know how to use math and spreadsheets to make a powerful list. From a game designer standpoint, when you're thinking about balance, no matter if you want tight balance or loose balance, there's some things you have to consider. And I just want you to consider some of these things when you're next arguing with someone online about balance. The first is, and it's basically my iron rule number one, is points by themselves do not do anything for balance. Points provide a structure to build within. They can help with balance, but by themselves cannot do anything. Like, if you're just relying on points, you won't, you're not bringing balance. So whenever you're looking at a problem in a game, like let's say there's a faction that always brings a certain unit because that certain unit always overperforms, the first thing people say is, well, they don't cost enough points. You need to raise those points. And the problem is, the game is an organism. So if you take that unit and you raise its points, and it may be too cheap, but if you raise its points, there's other things that are going to be impacted by that. And you're not going to actually achieve your goal in many cases, unless just the points were so egregiously low that you're like, yeah, they cost the same as this generic unit that doesn't have half of its output, so maybe I need to raise some points. So I'm not saying it's never going to be something that you look at. What I'm saying is that can't be your primary. There are usually other reasons why things are out of whack that go beyond points. And as a game designer, you have to understand that. There are, and I know I've covered this in previous videos, but I think this is important because I see this come up over and over again. And lately it was in 40K where I was watching this come up, but it applies everywhere. And GW games, Games Workshop games especially, fall victim to that, not because of the rules themselves, but because of the community. The community enforces these rigid tournament style, like every game will be set on this playing field with this type of terrain, and that's it. And when you do that, you cause problems with the balance, because what you're doing is you're saying, okay, any armies that are good at this static scenario with this static terrain layout will be the ones you frequently see. Does that mean the game as a whole is broken? And the answer is no, because even the Games Workshop game designers know this. They play with different scenarios and they play with different terrain layouts, but the community doesn't like to do that. So as a war game designer, after points, we have the roles and the scenarios. Those are important. If all of your scenarios are kill scenarios, then you're favoring units that can do a lot of offensive output. Those are the ones that are going to be particularly good. And if that's all you play, well, then those killy units may seem too cheap, because to be honest, when game designers come up with their final points, they have to be able to point a unit at its average. Meaning, if I have a kill scenario, but I have a defense scenario down here, my killy unit is going to be really valuable, but in my defense scenario, it may not be as valuable. So I have to come up with that points, right in the middle here. That's about where it should be pointed. But then if you're always just up here doing the killy, well, now you're pointed too low. Is that a fault of the game, or is that a fault of the community for basically running the same scenarios over and over again? So your scenario diversity plays a huge part in achieving more of a balance. And it should be, scenarios should not be known beforehand, in my opinion. Because if I know that I'm always going to be doing a certain mission, then I'm going to list tailor to that mission. If I don't know what my scenario is going to be, then I have to come up with a more well-rounded army list. And you'll see that reflected. And I've done that for 20 plus years in campaigns where I did not reveal the scenario until campaign day. So people had to come up with more generalized army lists. And maybe that's not for you. Maybe you don't like that. But to me, it generates and created more of a well-rounded force as opposed to people wanting to list tailor. And believe me, people still list tailored to those events. And some got it right, meaning they guessed the scenario correctly and did well. And some got it wrong and they got really angry. But again, it's not like that. I didn't surprise anyone. I let you know at the beginning of any campaign I've ever run, I don't reveal the scenarios until there's a time. Or like where we're playing BattleTech, we actually have a set roster. So you pick your roster at the beginning of the campaign, but after that, everything that's a part of your roster is salvage or things you've earned in the campaign. So that's different. In that case, you're not creating new lists between each battle. All right. The other piece, so you get points, you got scenarios, and then you have terrain layouts and tables. If I have a unit, a killy unit that's really good on open terrain but suffers when it has to go through like rough terrain, and then I create all my tables where there's no rough terrain, guess what? Shocking, that unit's really good all the time because it was pointed in the middle. It does really good in open terrain, not so good in rough terrain. Pointed it in the middle, but all tables don't use that because we don't like terrain interfering with our games. That's another very common thing I see in war games that cause balance issues. It's not the game, it's the way the community's playing the game. They're not wanting to use terrain. They don't like the terrain interfering with their game. They feel that they lost because of the terrain. Well, and again, war games have evolved certainly quite a bit in the last 30 years because war games traditionally you had to overcome terrain issues. That was part of wargaming. That was part of, commanding an army. You didn't get to pick your battlefield and pick all the optimal, solutions, but that's kind of where we are today. And the rules over the years have removed the impact of terrain by letting you shoot through forests, for example, even though you shouldn't be able to see through them, things like that. But yeah, keep that in mind. Especially in 40K, line of sight blocking terrain when I was playing 40K was huge. Because if you had line of sight blocking terrain, you were cutting the battlefield up. So you prevented people from being able to sit in the back and just pound you with long-range artillery. And it gave multiple avenues of attack, and it just made the game infinitely more interesting, in my opinion. But there were those that wanted to argue that quote-unquote, screwed them over. I used to use random terrain generators so that it was fair. Some tables were open, some tables were closed, a lot of tables were in between. But that way, it wasn't like, well, I'm playing the artillery army, so I want to make sure the table's open. Or, hey, I'm playing the close combat army, so I want lots of cover so you can't shoot at me. Obviously, you're going to go for what's in your best interest, so this is why I like random generators. The weakness of random terrain generators, of course, is that you have to have that terrain available to you. And more, people just don't have those terrain collections because that takes up space, and a lot of us just don't have a ton of space to hoard lots of terrain. And I know I used to have a massive terrain collection over the years, and when I moved here, I got rid of most of my wargaming stuff. And I have no intention of ever getting the volume of stuff that I used to have. So for me, terrain may play a bigger role as well. But I find myself getting more and more into like BattleTech scale or War Master scale, Epic scale, because I can fit a whole army in a shoebox, and the terrain, I can put a lot of terrain into smaller boxes, and it doesn't take up as much space as like the 28 millimeter stuff. So anyhow, I'd like you to consider that when you're talking about balance. Look at your tables. Look at your scenarios. Like, do the scenarios truly have different win objectives? A lot of scenarios don't truly have different win objectives. They're the same win objectives, but they're like reworded a little bit to give a minor difference, but you still build the same way towards them. Are your tables the same all the time? Those things will make a big difference in your overall games. So check those out, and leave some comments below on other things that you think may affect game balance other than points, which again, points can lead to some problems, but not always. Until then, again, I'm leaving a link below to the other channel. There'll also be a Discord link if you're interested in joining the Discord, but I'd like to get some more content pushed out. I might be looking at some more War Master. I haven't decided yet. I am in the middle of working on my own game system as well, so you may see that pop up. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the subscribers here, and I will talk to you later. Thanks.